Thursday, January 20th. This is Africa 54.
The European Union and the United States warned that Mali's political instability could impact the wider region. Nigeria targets illegal oil refining and soot pollution. And a South African study suggests the Omicron variant is less severe, even for the unvaccinated.
Frustrations are growing in West Africa, where regional and international efforts to speed up Mali's interim government transition to democratic elections appear to be at a dead end. Still, key players from Europe and the United States are refusing to give up, warning what is at stake goes far beyond Mali. We get more from VOA national correspondent Jeff Seldin.
Days after thousands took to the streets of Bamako protesting sanctions and telling the rest of the world to back off, Mali's foreign minister hammered home the message during a visit to Mauritania. Mali will not abandon dialogue, he said, but the rest of the world should take steps to better understand. Despite the military government's refusal to let go of power, a key European diplomat tells VOA she's confident eventually it will relent.
The pressure will be so strong that at one point they will have to come to a compromise.
For now, European Union officials are adamant about keeping tough sanctions in place, hoping a compromise comes sooner rather than later. But Mali's military rulers appear to be digging in, demanding a review of defense cooperation agreements with France and welcoming help from Russia, with reports that mercenaries from Russia's Wagner group are now on the ground, a move EU Special Representative for the Sahel, Emanuela Del Rey, describes as a step too far.
Cannot be accepted for the risk of having a domino effect in other countries. For instance, the countries of the region, the countries of the G5 Sahel, for instance, they fear that this could be an example that might somehow give the idea of copying the situation to other countries.
The possibility that other dominoes could fall has gotten the attention of U.S. officials.
Despite a decade of robust international investments, the region continues to trend in the wrong direction. Armed groups continue to expand their presence as well as their capabilities and their violence.
For years, the focus has been on a military solution. U.S. and French forces especially have been conducting training and counterterrorism missions across the Sahel to beat back groups fighting under the banner of Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. But now the focus is shifting. International military efforts are being scaled back, making room for greater focus on development and governance, something the U.S. hopes to accelerate by pursuing full membership in the Sahel Alliance, a grouping that brings together the United Nations, the World Bank, and multiple other countries. The question remains, though, will the citizens of countries like Mali buy it?
How do you promote local ownership? How do you promote local solutions if it's heavily tilted towards the internationals?
Western officials say they are hopeful despite the unabating anger by many in the region, now front and center in Mali. Jeff Seldin, VOA News.
Liberia's Deputy Information Minister Jalawa Tonpo says at least 29 people were killed overnight in a stampede at a church gathering. The incident in Monrovia occurred during an all-night Christian worship event at New Crew Town, a neighborhood on the outskirts of the capital. A resident who attended the event told Reuters the stampede erupted after a group of armed men rushed the crowd in an attempted robbery. President George Weah has declared a 3-day period of national mourning. Dozens of Sudanese judges and prosecutors on Thursday are condemning the killing of more than 70 protesters since a military takeover in October and are calling for investigations. At least 72 civilians have died and more than 2,000 have been injured in protests, according to medics aligned with the protest movement. Military leaders say the right to peaceful protests protected by the Sudanese police say they have faced aggression from demonstrators. A rare statement from 55 judges to the head of judiciary says military leaders have violated agreements and covenants since the October coup, as they have carried out the most heinous violations against defenseless protesters. More than 100 prosecutors say they are stopping work from Thursday in support of their call for security forces to cease violations and lift a state of emergency. A gathering co-organized by the United Nations mission in South Sudan brought together key stakeholders to address long-standing, mostly cattle-related violence in Mundari's Central Equatoria State. As a result of violence in Terekeka County, neighboring Lainya County has seen an influx of cattle and their owners, leading to conflicts over scarce resources. UNMISS is stepping up its effort to end the fighting among communities in Terekeka by supporting local authorities and church leaders in trying to stop the rapid increase of small arms among civilians by means of voluntary disarmament. Speaking during the forum, Dr. Paul Yukusuk, an Archbishop of Central Equatoria State, urged the Mundari community to live in peace and reconcile with each other. In Nigeria's oil-producing regions, officials are blaming illegal oil refiners for air pollution that can cause respiratory problems. Authorities began cracking down on offenders this month, but some local residents blame authorities for not making fuel affordable. Timothy Obiezu reports from Port Harcourt, Nigeria.
A state security patrol is tipped off about an oil theft site somewhere in the bush. After a bumpy one-hour ride, the oil bunkering site is found, and the suspect is arrested.
I started working here 3 months ago. When the police people came, the others ran away, but I have no money with me to go back home. I was trying to raise some money.
This is Obodo, a local community in Nigeria's southern river state. Authorities say they have found many sites where oil is stolen and stored, a practice called oil bunkering in Nigeria. Authorities also have begun cracking down on illegal oil refining operations known locally as bullfire. It's a local process where crude oil is burned to extract petroleum, causing residue to be released in the form of thick black soot. Officials say bullfire is rampant here. This base was found ransacked and abandoned by the time officials arrived.
This tank right here is full of crude oil. Illegal refinery operators abandoned it during a raid days ago, and authorities say that the land degradation caused by this one tank alone could take up to 75 years to redeem.
For years, River State has been ranked as having some of the most polluted air in Africa. Authorities say they intend to keep pressure on the illegal operations.
We are aware that the criminals are making their plots and plans to do whatever we do. We are not perturbed. We are equal to the task. It's a war. We have told them, we know them, we have their names. Their names have been declared wanted.
State Governor Nyesom Wike has declared 19 major illegal operators wanted and pledged to reward whistleblowers with $5,000 cash. Nigerian lawmakers have also called for an end to black soot pollution. But some locals say the illegal operators provide cheaper oil products. Kerosene dealer Sosa Gold says the crackdown on illegal refineries is threatening her business.
What to make I no one stop and be said, I dey get small gain to eat feed. I don't get husband, I don't get any help. So there, when I go buy, I will get small thing where I go use cater with I get 3 children, cater with my children.
Meanwhile, Nigeria is struggling to reopen refineries shut down for more than a year to undergo rehabilitation and improve their capacities. Critics say systemic government corruption is affecting progress, and Nigeria continues to rely on imports to meet the country's energy needs. Meanwhile, authorities say those who steal oil and illegally refine it will be charged and face jail time if convicted. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Port Harcourt, River State, Nigeria.
A South African study has found the Omicron variant of COVID-19 is less severe than previous ones, even for the unvaccinated. The country's top scientists say this could be good news for bringing an end to the pandemic, as the highly contagious variant also spreads resistance. Linda Giftash reports from Johannesburg.
South Africans no longer have to race to get home before midnight. A curfew imposed at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic was finally scrapped ahead of New Year's Eve. Now, nearing the end of the fourth wave, the country's scientists have more good news about the latest variant, Omicron.
We see about a 25% lowering of the risk of death, so about 1.3 times lower risk of death. And so that makes us think that that residual effect, that 25% reduction, could be the true effect due to lower virulence of the Omicron compared to previous variants.
The reduction is compared to the previous Delta variant, which was more severe than the original virus. The study, which has yet to be peer-reviewed, found Omicron to be similar in severity to the first wave. Davies says a major difference now is prior infections and vaccinations help reduce hospitalizations and deaths. While Omicron evaded vaccines and reinfected people, scientists say that's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's going to boost immune responses in people that were previously infected. It's going to boost immune responses in people that have been vaccinated. And it will also result in further immunity in people that haven't been previously infected or vaccinated up until now. The data is quite compelling that people that have this hybrid immunity, vaccine together with infection, in fact, they probably got a better immune response.
Scientists emphasize getting the virus is no substitute for a vaccine. Death rates remain highest among people who aren't inoculated. Official government figures say over 93,000 lives have been lost. And getting sick has other consequences.
But even a mild variant can cause a lot of chaos for a health service. For a number of reasons. The one is with these very high transmission rates, you get a lot of people infected at any one time, and that includes healthcare workers. And so that means that you've got a lot of people who are off work and often their contacts needing to be quarantined, and that can have huge impacts.
Still, the promise of less stringent protocols is welcome to businesses hurting from nearly 2 years of curfews and lockdowns.
There was a big conversational point on the 28th of December where do we stay closed or do we reopen? And the reason we reopened was these extra 3 hours. We do believe that there has to be a brighter day coming, yeah.
Whether increased immunity amid fewer restrictions will be enough to ward off the worst effects of the coronavirus will be tested by future variants. Linda Giftash for VOA News, Johannesburg.
South African-American businessman Patrick Soon-Shiong and President Cyril Ramaphosa have formally opened a vaccine facility aimed at tackling a lack of manufacturing capacity on the African continent. David Doyle has the details.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and billionaire businessman Patrick Soon-Shiong cut the ribbon on a new vaccine plant on Wednesday. The Cape Town facility is intended to help Soon-Shiong's Nant SA make COVID-19 shots in the future and address the continent's dearth in manufacturing capacity. Ramaphosa said Africa should no longer be last in line to access vaccines against pandemics.
Africa should no longer go cap in hand to the Western world, begging and begging for vaccines that they just want to drip off from their tables. We will stand on our own.
The pandemic has exposed unequal access to vaccines across the world. Just around 10% of people in Africa are fully vaccinated, compared to more than half in the global population. The new plant will also work on vaccines targeting cancer, TB and HIV.
This is a momentous day for us.
South African-American Soon-Shiong, who is also a medical doctor, will transfer technology and materials from his California-based Nant works.
So the idea is these are the kinds of 21st century technologies that as we implement manufacturing in South Africa by South Africans for South Africans, and be leapfrog of the rest of the world.
To ensure a pipeline of skilled workers, Soon Xiong has pledged $6.5 million for scholarships. The first production of vaccines is expected for later this year, and the aim is to produce 1 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses by 2025.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. Let us know what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come. U.S. tensions with Russia are high as President Joe Biden warns Russia not to invade Ukraine. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Empowerment and humanity towards a better world.
Economic and social progress of every society.
Facts and information from key players rather than spectators in politics, business, science and technology.
City, rural, educated, or underprivileged. We care and we listen to what matters to you.
Your voices are our voices.
It's been 1 year since U.S. President Joe Biden took the oath of office on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. He inherited a global coronavirus pandemic that, from the campaign trail, he promised to end. VOA's Arash Arbasadi reports on his handling of the pandemic.
Joe Biden campaigned on ending the pandemic. Now, 1 year into his presidency, the pandemic is rolling into its third year.
The president is really succeeding on the global response through direct commitments from the United States to countries in need, in terms of doses, in terms of dollars, in terms of cooperation.
What hasn't happened, says one campaign's Tom Hart, is bigger buy-in from Biden's counterparts.
Where they are not yet succeeding is providing the leadership to gather other countries together in a unified campaign to end the pandemic. What's happening is wealthy countries are making individual commitments and they sound good, but the parts are not adding up to the whole.
As COVID cases skyrocketed due to the Omicron variant, January marked the first time that polls showed more Americans disapproving of Biden's handling of the pandemic.
I think the Biden administration overall has done well when it put its mind to it. So I think they get an A-, B+. However, the issue is oftentimes some of their policies have over-relied on vaccine-only approach.
Epidemiologist Eric Feigl-Ding says the Biden administration could have done more to combat misinformation and to ensure that emergency funding for schools upgraded ventilation systems. He faults the Biden administration for not providing home COVID tests and N95 masks for free or at cost after the president recently announced an insurance-based reimbursement program.
Altogether, this is a pandemic of political leadership as well as the virus, as well as human behavior and politics around the human behavior. So the Biden administration is not in control of every aspect of those, especially the misinformation. But this is all the more important, and it reveals that the pandemic is not just solely a biological phenomenon. It's an information phenomenon.
Critics say the Biden administration must do more on the global stage as well as at home to get more vaccines to more people and convince the vaccine hesitant to come on board. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
President Joe Biden ends his first year in office as tensions with Russia are at a fever pitch. Biden has warned Russian President Vladimir Putin to choose a diplomatic resolution and to not invade neighboring Ukraine, a message his Secretary of State also is pushing in Kiev this week. VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell has more from Washington.
As the President of the United States spoke on the eve of his first year in office, one nation lurked not so subtly in the background.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, et cetera. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia if they further invade Ukraine, and that our allies and partners are ready to impose severe cost and significant harm on Russia and the Russian economy.
For weeks now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has massed tens of thousands of troops along the Ukrainian border in what Ukraine and the U.S. describe as a clear threat. The two presidents spoke twice by phone in December, and last week diplomatic teams met in 3 European capitals to try to defuse the situation. VOA spoke with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Kyiv, where he met with Ukrainian leadership this week in a show of support.
We've offered Russia a clear choice, a choice between pursuing dialogue and diplomacy on the one hand, or confrontation and consequences on the other hand. And we've just been engaged in an intensive series of diplomatic engagements with Russia, directly between us through the Strategic Stability Dialogue at NATO with the NATO-Russia Council, at the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And my hope remains that Russia will pursue that diplomatic path. It's clearly preferable.
Biden's critics in Congress say he needs to be firm with Putin.
The focus now should be on stopping an invasion, not talking about what happens afterwards. What happens afterwards is not really debatable. The Russians are going to have a very good first day if they invade. After that, the sledding gets very difficult, as they have found out in other places. Occupying a country is very difficult. It's expensive in both blood and treasure. And the president said he has pointed that out to President Putin. And that's something that needs to be underscored as we go forward.
Jeremy Suri, a history professor at the University of Texas at Austin, said that Biden is taking lessons from the Cold War when it comes to communicating with Russia.
One of the lessons from the Cold War is you have to be clear where your lines are, so there aren't misperceptions. And so I think it is important. He is making certain that Vladimir Putin does not underestimate the resolve of the United States, but he's also showing that the United States has limited aims. Our goal is not to bring Ukraine into NATO anytime soon, but we will not allow an external power to dictate the future of NATO. So I think having those clear lines is important.
So what now for the two great powers? Blinken meets Friday with his Russian counterpart for another round of diplomacy. Meanwhile, Biden says Putin can decide on his next move as Ukraine watches and waits. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
In an interview with VOA Eastern Europe Bureau Chief Miroslava Gondadze, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke about actions the U.S. is ready to take to stop Russian aggression against Ukraine.
We've equally made clear that if Russia chooses to renew its aggression against Ukraine, we, and not just we, the United States, many countries throughout Europe and even some beyond, will respond very forcefully and resolutely, and in three ways. First, we've been working intensely on elaborating extensive sanctions, financial, economic, export controls, and others.
Doesn't include
doing that, I'm not going to get into the details of what they are, but we're doing that in very close coordination with European allies and partners. A second consequence would almost certainly be further assistance, defensive military assistance to Ukraine. And third, it's almost certain that NATO would have to reinforce its own defenses on its eastern flank. And, you know, what's so striking about this is that when you think about it, President Putin, going back to 2014, has managed to precipitate what he says he wants to prevent. Because, among other things, NATO had to reinforce itself after Russia invaded Ukraine, seized Crimea, the Donbass, after that happened. So we've laid out the consequences clearly for Russia, but also the far preferable path of resolving differences diplomatically, and we'll see which path President Putin decides to take. The G7, the leading democratic economies in the world, the European Union, NATO have all each declared, as institutions, as a collection of countries, that there will be, and I quote, massive consequences for Russia if it renews its aggression against Ukraine. We've also said that the measures that we're looking at go well beyond steps that we've taken in the past, including in 2014. I'm not going to detail them here or telegraph the steps we take, but I can tell you the consequences would be severe. But again, I want to insist on the fact that it would be far preferable not to have to go down that path. We're fully prepared to do it, but the preference is to see if we can resolve differences, address concerns in both directions through diplomacy.
The U.S. National Security Advisor recently said that if Russia wants Nord Stream to start operating, it will have to stop aggression in Ukraine. Is the United States ready to accept the completion and activation of the pipeline for Russia to withdraw troops from the borders?
Well, we continue to oppose the pipeline for reasons that are well known and are long known. We think that it actually undermines Europe's energy security. It obviously does tremendous potential damage to Ukraine, including giving Russia the option to avoid the existing pipeline through Ukraine that results in a lot of transit fees for Ukraine. And the list goes on. Having said that, the pipeline is actually complete. The construction's been completed. It's not operational. And to Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor's point, right now, that pipeline is as much, if not more, leverage for us as it is for Russia, because the idea that if Russia commits renewed aggression against Ukraine, gas would flow through that pipeline is highly, highly improbable. So that's an interesting factor to see whether it affects Russia's thinking as it's deciding what to do.
Was VOA Eastern European Bureau Chief Myroslava Gondadze speaking with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.